Alright guys, here's part 3. Again, I'm doing these 10-minute clips because there's a 10-minute maximum on YouTube, which is where I'm planning to post these guys. Okay, so we left off with slide 13, so we're moving to slide 14 now. The title is Panic Disorder Theories. These first several are biological theories. The first one is just neurotransmitters and their role, and this isn't really any different than what we talked about with depression and bipolar disorder. Poor regulation of norepinephrine or serotonin, excuse the squeaking in the background, that's my dog. So poor regulation of norepinephrine or serotonin can be involved in the development and maintenance of panic disorder. This is true of any anxiety disorder, but another one you should be aware of is GABA. GABA is not involved in mood disorders, but it is theorized to be involved in anxiety disorders quite a bit. And we're actually going to talk about that some more as this particular unit goes on. Not so much in this lecture, but keep GABA in mind as a neurotransmitter not implicated in mood disorders, but definitely implicated in anxiety disorders. The next one is the Kindling model, and you see it says, see next slide, where there's a visual. The Kindling model basically says that poor regulation in one area of your brain causes panic attacks. And frequent panic attacks basically causes your limbic system, which is sort of the emotional center of your brain, to be hyper alert and to respond to less severe cues. So as time goes on and you have more and more panic attacks, it takes less and less to make you panic. So the idea of kindling means you're making something more sensitive over time and less likely to, or more likely to respond. The third one on this slide is the suffocation false alarm theory, the idea that brains of people with panic disorder are actually hypersensitive to carbon dioxide. So small increases in the amount of carbon dioxide taken into the body increases the likelihood of the utilization of the fight or flight response or panic. So the idea is simply that these people are panicking because they encounter carbon dioxide and they're sensitive to it. And there's some validity into this in that we use induced hyperventilation in behavioral treatments of panic disorder. But to say it encompasses everything, it's probably going a little bit too far. Okay, slide 15 is the visual of the Kindling model, and so you can see exactly what I described before. Poor regulation in the locus ceruleus leads to panic attacks, which lowers the threshold for chronic anxiety in the limbic system. Chronic anxiety then increases the likelihood of dysregulation in locus ceruleus, which then increases the likelihood of panic attacks, and so on it goes. Genetic theorists, moving on to slide number 16, they say what they would typically say, which is that we inherit genetic vulnerabilities to mental illness. We don't inherit a specific gene for a specific disorder, but we do inherit vulnerabilities that in the presence of the right amount or the right type of life stress will trigger a clinically relevant level of a disorder. Importantly, in anxiety, what the data shows is that if someone has panic disorder, that doesn't mean that they're children are at greater risk specifically for panic disorder. It means they're at greater risk for anxiety in general. So panic in one could lead to OCD in the next generation, could lead to PTSD in the next generation. So anxiety begets anxiety. Specific anxiety disorders do not, however, beget specific anxiety disorders. And then the last theory I want to talk about here is cognitive theories. And we'll talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, but really the action in treatment for anxiety is in the behavioral part. Doesn't mean cognition is irrelevant, simply means that the behavioral part of treatment causes the greatest amount of impact, and I'll give you some data on that in a second. But people prone to panic attack, cognitive theorists say that A, they pay very close attention to bodily sensations, B, they misinterpret those sensations, and C, they engage in catastrophizing. So I'm very aware of what's going on in my body. My heart rate increases and I start to think I'm having a heart attack. That would be what they're talking about. Okay, so slide number 17 is entitled Difficult to Read But Useful Slide. And what this does is show you some data on some studies looking at people who are vulnerable to panic attacks. What they found was that the percentage of people reporting panic between panic disorder folks versus controls was drastically different when you had the groups hyperventilate. It's not clear whether they were breathing through a straw or something else, but when they induced hyperventilation in a lab, folks with panic disorder, 47% of them had a panic attack, whereas only 8% of the people without panic disorder did. In a similar study, they had people simply inhale carbon dioxide. 65% of the folks with panic disorder had a panic attack, only 12% of the control group did. Meaning that folks with panic disorder are responding to physical sensations differently than folks without. And even in a highly safe and controlled environment like a lab experiment, they are highly vulnerable to things like actually having a panic attack. I don't need to go over the next slide with you. It's simply a description of the diathesis stress model. But let's start with treatments. And I actually forgot to set my stopwatch on this one, so I'm going to do this one slide and then stop it and move on to stage 4 of this video. So biological treatments, you'll see tricyclic antidepressants are listed. These guys, just like they do when we talked about them for mood disorders, increase levels of norepinephrine and a bunch of other neurotransmitters. They can be, they have a lot of side effects, they can be dangerous in high doses, and honestly, they're not indicated as a great treatment for panic. SSRIs, however, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and this again would be like Zoloft or Paxil, they actually do have some good data saying they can be useful. They're not as useful as behavioral treatments, they don't have as good numbers, but they're not an insane treatment approach. It's just not ideal. And these guys, again, increase the level of serotonin by diminishing reuptake. So when serotonin is released from the presynaptic neuron into the synapse, that presynaptic neuron does not then re-up as much of the neurotransmitter. And the third one, benzodiazepines, and I already talked to you guys about that. But the idea is that these guys clearly do make you stop feeling as anxious or really anxious at all in the moment. But that doesn't make you less prone to anxiety in general.